She walked into the grand mansion for the first time, eyes widening at the sheer luxury around her. Chandeliers sparkled, marble floors gleamed, and fresh roses filled the air. But she wasn't here to admire wealth. She was here to work. Emma adjusted her uniform, her heart pounding. This job was her last hope. No more struggling in tiny apartments, no more working double shifts. This was a fresh start. But just as she stepped forward, she almost stumbled over a man kneeling on the ground, trimming the bushes. "Watch where you're going," she snapped instinctively, annoyed that someone was blocking her way. The man looked up, his deep brown eyes meeting hers. He was dressed in a simple green uniform, his hands covered in soil, sweat glistening on his forehead. "Apologies, miss," he said in a calm, unbothered tone. Emma scoffed. "Ugh, whatever. Just don't get in my way." She walked off, barely sparing him another glance. To her, he was just another worker. A gardener. A nobody. But the man didn't seem offended. Instead, a smirk tugged at the corner of his lips. He went back to trimming the roses, as if nothing had happened. The moment passed, insignificant to her, but not to him. Over the next few days, Emma noticed him again and again. Every morning, he was in the garden, tending to the flowers with quiet precision. She couldn't understand why the other staff seemed to treat him with a strange respect. The head butler would nod politely at him. The older maids would whisper about him, their eyes glancing toward him with curiosity. "Who even is he?" she muttered one day as she wiped the kitchen counters. "Who?" One of the senior maids looked up. "That gardener." "What's his name?" The maid hesitated. Mr. Alexander. He's been here for a while." Emma frowned. "Mr. Since when do gardeners get called Mr.?" The old maid's face paled slightly. "You should be careful how you speak to him." Emma laughed. "What? Is he secretly royalty?" She rolled her eyes. "Please, he's just a worker like us." But the unease in the older maid's eyes didn't fade. That same evening, Emma was sent to the garden with a tray of refreshments for the staff. She wasn't happy about it, but orders were orders. As she approached the greenhouse, she saw him standing there talking on the phone. His entire demeanor had changed. Gone was the quiet, obedient gardener. His back was straight, his voice was firm, authoritative. "No, I don't care what the board says," he was saying. "Delay the meeting until I return." Emma froze. Board? Meeting? What was he talking about? Before she could process it, he turned and saw her. His smirk returned. "Spying on me, are we?" She straightened. I wasn't spying, just bringing this for the staff." He walked toward her, his gaze sharp. "Good. Then leave it." His voice was no longer soft. Something was unsettling about the way he spoke. Almost like a boss. Emma felt her stomach tighten with something she couldn't quite name. But no, that was impossible. He was just a gardener, right? Emma never paid much attention to the gardener. To her, he was just another worker, someone beneath her world. She had struggled all her life, fighting for respect, and now that she had finally landed a job in this mansion, she was determined to rise above the lower staff. She refused to be grouped with them. That meant keeping her distance, acting superior, and making sure everyone knew she was different. She wasn't going to stay a maid forever. But there was something about this particular worker that irritated her. Maybe it was the way he never seemed intimidated by her sharp words, or how he always had that smug little smirk when she scoffed at him, like right now. "Move," she ordered as she stepped into the greenhouse, nearly bumping into him. He was crouched beside a rare orchid, his fingers brushing over the petals with an expert's care. Without looking up, he responded, "You could say, 'Excuse me,' you know." Emma rolled her eyes. Or, "You could not be in my way." He finally turned those deep brown eyes to her, and for a moment, something flickered in them, something unreadable. Then, the smirk returned. "Noted, princess." She bristled. "Don't call me that." "Why not?" His voice was calm. teasing. You act like one. Emma's lips pressed into a thin line. Whatever. She spun on her heels and stalked away, but she could still feel his gaze on her back. Over the next few days, their interactions only grew more tense. She would make snide remarks about his job, about how dirty his clothes were, how simple his life must be. And yet, he never seemed to get angry. He just watched her with that knowing look, like he was waiting for something. Do you even make enough to survive? She sneered one afternoon as she passed him in the garden. I don't see how anyone could live on a gardener's salary. Why? He asked casually. Thinking of switching careers? She scoffed. Please. I have actual ambitions. Unlike you. Ambitions, he repeated, as if the word amused him. And what exactly do you want? She lifted her chin. To be rich. To live in a place like this. To never have to worry about money again. His smirk deepened. And you think being rich solves everything? Of course it does. She folded her arms. Money is power. It's respect. It's freedom. Interesting. His voice held something unreadable. So, if you had all the money in the world, you'd be happy? Obviously. He studied her for a long moment, then gave a small nod. Good to know. Emma hated how unsettled she felt after their conversation. There was something about him that made her uneasy, but she refused to dwell on it. He was just a gardener, a nobody, and she had better things to worry about. That night, the mansion hosted an extravagant event, a charity gala filled with elite guests, glittering gowns, and expensive champagne. Emma, like the rest of the maids, was assigned to serve. She moved through the crowd, balancing a tray of drinks, careful not to attract attention. That was until she heard a voice that made her freeze. Ah, Mr. Alexander, you made it. Her heart nearly stopped. Slowly, she turned toward the voice. Standing near the grand staircase, surrounded by powerful businessmen and politicians, was the gardener. Except, he wasn't dressed like a gardener anymore. Gone were the dirt-stained clothes and work boots. Instead, he wore a perfectly tailored black suit, his posture commanding, his presence radiating authority. And then it hit her. The whispers, the respectful nods, the way everyone seemed to tiptoe around him. He wasn't just a gardener. He was the owner of the mansion. And he was looking right at her, that same smirk playing on his lips. Enjoying the party, Miss Emma? He asked smoothly. The tray in her hands trembled. She couldn't breathe. She had looked down on him, mocked him, treated him like nothing. And now she was the one standing there, powerless. Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The more she saw Alexander, the less he seemed like an ordinary gardener. He never looked rushed, never flinched when the mansion's real owners walked by. Sometimes it seemed like they respected him. One evening, she saw him standing near the grand fountain, flipping through a leather-bound book. His calloused hands, stained with soil, carefully turned each page like it was something precious. What's that? She asked, approaching him out of curiosity. Alexander barely glanced up. A book. Emma rolled her eyes. I can see that. But why does a gardener need to read something like that? She tried to catch the title, but he shut the book before she could. Why does anyone read? He countered smoothly. To learn. She frowned. Yeah, but that doesn't exactly look like a gardening manual. Alexander smirked, slipping the book into his pocket. You're right. It's not. And then, as if the conversation was over, he turned back to trimming the roses. Emma felt a strange sense of irritation. Why was he always like this? Always so calm, so unaffected. Most workers here rushed around, obeying orders, keeping their heads down. But him? He acted like he belonged. A few days later, another moment made her pause. The mansion's owner, Mr. Whitmore, arrived with guests, wealthy businessmen in tailored suits. Emma was setting up drinks when she saw Alexander standing nearby, watching them with an expression that wasn't curiosity, It was familiarity. Then something strange happened. One of the businessmen locked eyes with Alexander and immediately looked startled. He leaned over to Mr. Whitmore and whispered something. Mr. Whitmore chuckled and shook his head. "Just a simple worker," he said, dismissing whatever concern the man had. But Emma caught the way Alexander's jaw tightened, the brief flicker of annoyance in his eyes. It was gone in a second, replaced by his usual composed demeanor. Later that night, Emma overheard two maids whispering in the hallway. "Did you see how that businessman reacted to Alexander?" one said. "It's like he knew him." "I heard a rumor," the other whispered. "They say he's not just a gardener, that he's—" She lowered her voice even more. Emma leaned closer, but before she could hear, a sharp voice cut through the air. "Gossiping again?" It was Alexander. He stood at the end of the hall, arms crossed, watching them with an unreadable expression. The maids scattered like frightened mice. Emma, however, held her ground. "What are you hiding?" she demanded. His lips curled into a smirk. "Why do you care?" "Because something about you doesn't make sense," she admitted. "You act like you own this place." He stepped closer, his gaze never wavering. "And if I did?" Emma scoffed. "Then I'd say you're delusional." Alexander chuckled, shaking his head. "Maybe you should stop worrying about me and focus on your job." He walked past her, leaving Emma standing there, heart pounding. The more she interacted with him, the more convinced she became. Alexander wasn't just a gardener. But if he wasn't, then who was he? Emma strutted through the grand garden of the estate, her designer heels clicking sharply against the stone pathway. The early morning sunlight illuminated the pristine hedges, the vibrant roses, and the neatly trimmed topiaries. But she hardly noticed. She had bigger concerns, mainly the audacity of the so-called gardener who had spoken to her the day before, as if they were equals. She had been raised to believe that status mattered, that wealth dictated respect. And yet, this man, with his rough hands and rolled-up sleeves, had looked her in the eye without the deference she was used to. Today, she would put him in his place. "You missed a spot," she announced, pointing at a tiny patch of overgrown grass near the fountain. The man in question, Liam, paused, his grip tightening around the shears in his hand. He turned slowly, his dark eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her breath hitch for a fraction of a second. He said nothing, simply tilted his head slightly as if waiting for her to continue. "Honestly, what do they even pay you for?" she added with a smirk, flipping her hair over her shoulder. "If I were in charge, I'd make sure my staff did their jobs." Liam exhaled slowly, setting down his shears with calculated control. "You're welcome to trim it yourself if it bothers you that much," he said, voice calm but edged with something unreadable. Emma scoffed. "Excuse me? Do I look like a gardener to you?" "No," Liam replied evenly. "You look like someone who's never worked a hard day in her life." Emma's jaw tightened. "How dare you?" she snapped, stepping closer. "Just because you work here doesn't mean you get to speak to me like that." "And just because you live here doesn't mean you own me," Liam countered, standing his ground. A flicker of something, surprise, irritation, crossed her features. No one had ever spoken to her this way. Servants, employees, even distant relatives knew better than to challenge her. Yet here he was, unbothered by the difference in their status. Emma folded her arms. "People like you should know their place," she sneered. "And people like you," Liam said, stepping forward, "should learn that money doesn't buy character." His words struck her like a slap. She wasn't sure why. Maybe because deep down, a tiny part of her knew he was right, but she would never admit that. Instead, she narrowed her eyes. "You're fired," she said coldly. Liam chuckled, low and rich, sending an unexpected shiver down her spine. "You can't fire me." "Oh, can't I?" she challenged. "My uncle owns this estate and he listens to me," Liam smirked. "Then go ahead, call him. Tell him you want to fire his gardener. Let's see what he says." Emma hesitated. There was something in his confidence that unsettled her. Why wasn't he worried? Why did he look almost amused? She pulled out her phone and quickly dialed her uncle's number. It rang twice before he picked up. Emma? Everything all right? Uncle, your gardener is being completely disrespectful. I want him gone, she declared, expecting instant agreement. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then, to her absolute shock, her uncle burst into laughter. Oh, Emma. Oh, dear. I was wondering when this would happen. What? She demanded. Sweetheart, her uncle said, his voice still amused. Liam isn't the gardener. Emma blinked. What are you talking about? Of course he is. He's been trimming the hedges all morning. Yes, her uncle agreed. But not because he has to. Liam owns this estate. He's my business partner. The mansion, the gardens, everything you see, it belongs to him. Emma's breath caught in her throat. She turned slowly to look at Liam, who was watching her with a knowing smirk. He leaned casually against the stone fountain, arms crossed, utterly unbothered. Emma, her uncle continued, you might want to apologize. But Emma couldn't move, couldn't think. The man she had just belittled, insulted, and tried to fire, was the owner of everything around her? Her face burned with embarrassment as Liam finally spoke. Looks like you missed a spot, he murmured, throwing her own words back at her. And with that, he picked up his shears and strolled away, leaving her standing there, speechless, as the weight of her mistake settled in. The mystery deepens as the days go by, and the quiet gardener, whom she once dismissed as nothing more than a simple, lowly worker, begins to puzzle her in ways she never expected. It was supposed to be a normal day. She had planned to spend the afternoon lounging in the garden, reading a book, enjoying the peace and tranquility her family's mansion had to offer. The expansive estate had always been her escape, a place where she could feel at ease, where the outside world seemed to disappear entirely. As usual, the gardener was there, pruning the bushes, trimming the flowers, and tending to the grounds as if it were the most important task in the world. She hadn't given him a second thought before, but today was different. Maybe it was the way the sunlight hit his face, casting a soft glow on his features, or the intensity with which he worked, focused, driven, and meticulous in his care for every petal, every leaf. She had always seen him as just another servant, another part of the landscape. But now something felt off. She found herself stealing glances at him, wondering if there was more to this man than he let on. His hands, though rough from years of manual labor, moved with an elegance that she couldn't ignore. The way he held the pruning shears, so deliberate, so controlled, spoke of a precision that didn't match the image of the humble gardener she had imagined. There was a quiet confidence about him that suggested he wasn't just a mere worker, but someone who had a deep understanding of the world around him, someone who didn't belong in the background. It was absurd to think this way. After all, he was just a gardener. She was a young woman born into a life of privilege, surrounded by luxury, and there was no way someone like him could possibly have a place in her world. Yet, she couldn't shake the feeling that something about him was different. As the day wore on, she found herself watching him more intently than she should have. There was something in his eyes, something distant, like he was lost in thought, caught between two worlds. It made her uneasy, though she couldn't quite place why. She turned her gaze back to the pages of her book, trying to distract herself from the feeling creeping up her spine. She tried to forget about him, but it was impossible. Later that afternoon, she watched him walk toward the mansion, his posture straight, his steps purposeful, as though he had a reason for being there. It struck her again. This man was not what he appeared to be. And then, just as quickly as the thought appeared, she pushed it aside, telling herself that it was all in her head. But the seed had been planted, and the more she tried to ignore it, the more she found herself wondering about him. She had no idea why she was so intrigued. The next few days passed in a blur of routine, yet she couldn't stop thinking about the gardener. Was he simply a man doing his job, or was there something more to him? Her curiosity gnawed at her. Each day she passed him in the garden, She couldn't help but look for signs that might confirm her suspicions. Was his life as simple as it seemed? Or was there a hidden depth to his existence? Then one afternoon she caught him off guard. She had been walking out of the mansion, her mind lost in thought, when she noticed him standing near the back door, talking to a man in a sharp suit. The man was well-dressed, professional, and exuded an air of power. It was a brief exchange, and before she could get closer, the suited man turned and walked away. The gardener, however, didn't seem to be fazed by the encounter. He resumed his work as if nothing had happened. But she noticed the subtle tension in his shoulders, the way his hands trembled ever so slightly as he picked up his tools again. She couldn't help but wonder, who was that man? And why had the gardener seemed so different around him? It wasn't just the interaction that made her uneasy. It was the sudden realization that there was a part of this man's life that she didn't know. There was something hidden beneath the surface, something she couldn't grasp. What was it about him that kept drawing her in? As the days turned into weeks, her intrigue grew, and she found herself trying to find ways to learn more about him without him noticing. She asked around, but everyone she spoke to only had praise for him, describing him as a quiet, hard-working man who had been with the estate for years. There was nothing unusual about him. At least, that's what they all said. But deep down, she knew there was more to him. She couldn't explain why, but she felt like she was on the edge of uncovering something big, and as much as she tried to resist, her curiosity pushed her forward. One day, while walking through the garden, she saw him kneeling by the rose bushes, carefully tending to a cluster of flowers. She stopped in her tracks, watching him for a moment. There was something about the way he moved, something purposeful in his actions, that made her heart beat just a little faster. She cleared her throat, stepping forward cautiously. "I don't think I've ever seen someone so passionate about roses," she said, breaking the silence. He looked up at her, his expression unreadable. "Roses are like people," he said softly. "They need care and attention, or they'll wither away." There was something in his voice, an undercurrent of wisdom, of experience, that made her pause. She stared at him for a moment, unsure of what to say next. He stood up, brushing the dirt from his hands. "If you're interested in roses," he said, "I could show you how to take care of them." For a moment, she considered saying no, dismissing him as just another worker. But something inside her told her to accept his offer. Maybe it was the way he spoke, or the fact that he had shown an interest in her. "I'd like that," she said, surprising herself with her own words. The gardener smiled, and for the first time, she felt a warmth spread through her chest. Little did she know, this simple encounter would be the beginning of something far greater. As he showed her the delicate art of caring for the roses, she began to realize that there was so much more to him than she had ever imagined. He wasn't just a gardener. He was a man with knowledge, with stories, with a life that was far beyond the mansion walls. The mystery deepened, and with it, her fascination for him. But she had no idea just how deep that mystery ran, and just how much it would change everything she thought she knew about the world. As the days passed, Sarah couldn't shake the nagging feeling that there was more to the gardener, Alex, than met the eye. Every time they crossed paths in the sprawling mansion's garden, she felt a strange connection that she couldn't explain. He was always polite, always reserved, and yet there was something about him, an air of mystery, a quiet confidence, that made her wonder. Why did he never speak much? Why did he never try to connect with her, even when their eyes met across the rose bushes, or when she'd offer a polite hello? One afternoon, as she strolled through the garden, she spotted him again. He was working near the fountain, pruning the roses with almost perfect precision, and she couldn't help but notice how focused he seemed. His movements were deliberate, yet graceful. His dark hair fell slightly over his forehead, and for a moment she found herself mesmerized by the way his hands worked with the flowers. It was as if he belonged there, in this grand estate, even though he never seemed to speak of it. He wasn't like the other staff members who were always so eager to talk about their lives. Alex kept his to himself, which only made her more curious. But what struck her most was the subtle aura of nobility that seemed to surround him. His demeanor was elegant, a composure that was hard to ignore. She had always assumed he was just another employee, but now she wasn't so sure. The idea of a gardener who could command such elegance didn't sit well with her, considering how high class her family was. She had always been taught to think of herself as above the common folk, especially the workers, and here was a man who somehow seemed to defy that perception. "Alex," she called out, her voice a bit hesitant. He paused, straightening up as if he had been expecting her. "Can I ask you something?" He didn't respond immediately, his eyes scanning her face with an unreadable expression. "Of course," he finally said in his soft voice, which seemed to carry a strange weight. "Why do you always stay so quiet?" she asked, slightly embarrassed at the bluntness of her question. He gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. "I don't feel the need to speak much," he replied simply. "I find peace in the silence." There was something about his words that made her pause. Most people would have rushed to fill the silence, but Alex seemed to embrace it. It was as if he were content in his own company, as though he didn't need validation from others. It struck her as peculiar and intriguing. As the days passed, Sarah's fascination with him grew. She began to notice little things. How the other staff members seemed to treat him with a sort of reverence, as if they were all aware of something she wasn't. Whenever she asked about him, they would change the subject or offer vague answers. It was starting to feel as though there was something important about Alex that no one wanted to talk about. One evening, as the sun began to set, Sarah decided to follow him. She wasn't sure why, but she had to know more. She quietly slipped out of the back door, careful not to be seen, and crept through the garden toward the small greenhouse where Alex often retreated during his breaks. She had seen him disappear into it a few times, but she had never thought much of it, until now. The greenhouse, overgrown with vines, was an idyllic spot, but there was an air of secrecy to it that intrigued her. As she reached the greenhouse, she peered through the frosted glass and caught sight of Alex inside. He wasn't tending to plants this time. Instead, he was sitting on an old wooden chair, staring down at something in his hand. His expression was intense, almost as if he were deep in thought. Sarah stepped closer, unable to tear her gaze away. It was then that she saw it. In his hands, he was holding a small, leather-bound book. It was old, worn, and obviously treasured. The pages were yellowed with age, and it was clear that this wasn't something anyone would simply throw away. The book seemed important to him, too important for someone in his position. As she continued to watch, she realized that there was more to Alex than she had ever imagined. There had to be a reason he carried something so valuable around with him. Her curiosity got the better of her, and she stepped forward, pushing the door open just slightly. The hinges creaked and she froze, holding her breath. Alex turned quickly, his sharp eyes immediately locking onto hers. There was no surprise in his expression, no shock at being caught. Instead, he looked at her with a strange calmness, almost as if he had been waiting for her to find him out. "Sarah," he said quietly, closing the book with a deliberate motion. "I didn't think you'd be the one to uncover this." Her heart raced, and for the first time, she felt genuinely nervous. "What is that?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He sighed, standing up slowly and walking toward her. "It's a family heirloom," he said, his tone distant. "But it's not something I can just explain." Sarah's mind raced. The puzzle pieces were starting to fit together, but she still didn't have all the answers. Why was Alex hiding something so significant? And why was he pretending to be a gardener? Before she could say anything else, Alex's gaze softened and he stepped back. "This is something I've kept hidden for a long time," he said. "I never wanted you to find out." But it was too late. Sarah knew now that there was something incredibly important about Alex. Something that went far beyond the role of a simple gardener. And as she stood there, staring at him, A sinking feeling started to form in her chest. She realized that whatever secret he was hiding, it was bigger than both of them. She needed to know the truth. And nothing, not even Alex's guarded silence, would stop her from uncovering it. She couldn't sleep that night, her mind replaying every conversation, every dismissive look she'd given him. How could she have been so blind? The man she had mocked, ignored, and belittled was the true owner of the mansion, not just a gardener. Shame burned through her as she recalled the way she had tossed orders at him, the way she had assumed his worth based on his clothes and calloused hands. She had prided herself on her intelligence, her ability to read people, yet she had been completely fooled. And now, she was the fool. The next morning, she avoided going to the garden, afraid to face him, afraid of the judgment in his eyes. But fate wasn't so kind. At breakfast, he sat at the head of the long dining table, completely at ease, radiating the quiet power of a man who knew exactly who he was. She barely managed to eat, every bite tasting like regret. He acted as if nothing had happened, which somehow made it worse. If he had been angry, if he had thrown her words back in her face, maybe she could have handled it. But this indifference, this quiet amusement, it made her feel even smaller. Is something wrong? His voice broke through her thoughts. She forced a smile, shaking her head. No, everything's fine. Liar. Everything was not fine. She had made a mistake that she didn't know how to fix. Over the next few days, her behavior shifted. She found herself lingering near him, watching the way he spoke to the staff with kindness, the way he took time to listen, to help, to be more than just an employer. The more she observed, the deeper her guilt sank. She had always thought wealth made people arrogant, but here was a man who had more money than she could imagine. Yet he was nothing like the shallow men she had known. He was patient, wise, and completely different from the assumptions she had made about him. She wanted to apologize. But how? How did one apologize for looking down on someone, for treating them as less than they were? The perfect opportunity came one evening. She found him in the garden, trimming the roses just as he always had. The sight made her throat tighten. He didn't need to do this. He had an entire staff for it. And yet, he still took time for the simple things. He didn't even look up when he said, "You've been staring for the past 5 minutes." Her face flushed. I wanted to talk." He finally turned to her, his gaze calm and unreadable. "About?" She swallowed hard. "I owe you an apology." A small smirk played on his lips. "For what?" He was making her say it. She took a deep breath. "For how I treated you. For assuming you were just a gardener. For being—" She paused, struggling with the word. "Judgmental." He leaned on his gardening tool, studying her. "And what changed?" She hesitated. "I saw who you really are." He nodded slowly. "And who am I?" She opened her mouth, then closed it. The truth was, she still didn't know. She had spent so much time thinking he was beneath her, and now she realized he was someone she barely understood. "Someone better than I gave you credit for," she admitted softly. He tilted his head, considering her words. Then, to her surprise, he simply said, "All right." "All right?" she echoed. "You're forgiven." Just like that? No lecture, no resentment? "You're not angry?" He chuckled. "If I got angry every time someone underestimated me, I'd never have peace." His words hit her harder than she expected. He had dealt with this before. He was used to people judging him, and yet he had never let it change him. That night, she couldn't stop thinking about him, about the way he had handled the entire situation with grace, about the way he had let her come to her own realization instead of forcing it. And for the first time, she wondered, had she misjudged more than just his status? Had she misjudged the kind of man he was? She stood frozen at the entrance of the grand hall, her heart pounding against her ribs as if trying to break free. The man she had belittled, mocked, and treated as nothing more than a mere gardener, now stood before her, dressed in an impeccably tailored suit, surrounded by business tycoons, celebrities, and influential figures. The realization hit her like a freight train. He wasn't just rich. He was the owner of the mansion, the one she had assumed belonged to someone else, someone more worthy in her mind. Shame burned through her veins as she replayed every moment of their interactions, her dismissive attitude, the way she had laughed at him when he had tried to speak, assuming he was beneath her. She wanted to disappear, to rewind time, to take back every word, but it was too late. His piercing gaze locked onto hers, unreadable yet heavy with something she couldn't quite decipher. Was it amusement? Contempt? Indifference? Whatever it was, it made her feel small. She had built her entire world on appearances, status, and wealth. And now, standing before the man she had misjudged, she realized how foolish she had been. The people around him spoke in hushed tones, clearly recognizing her discomfort. Some even whispering, probably recounting how she had treated him like a nobody. He didn't move at first, simply watching her squirm under the weight of her own embarrassment. Then, slowly, he strode forward, each step deliberate, controlled. The room seemed to shrink as he approached, and she fought the urge to flee. But where would she even go? This was his world, his domain, and she had no escape. "Miss Hamilton," he said smoothly, his voice laced with something that sent chills down her spine. "I believe we've met before, though back then you seemed rather uninterested in conversation." The words were a dagger, subtle but sharp, slicing through her composure. She swallowed hard, her throat dry as she tried to find her voice, but it betrayed her, leaving her silent, exposed. He tilted his head, feigning curiosity. "Nothing to say? That's surprising. You had so much to say when you thought I was just a gardener?" There it was, the direct hit. Her cheeks burned as murmurs spread through the crowd, eyes watching, waiting to see how she would respond. She forced herself to stand tall, to regain some semblance of dignity. I didn't know," she managed to whisper, hating how weak she sounded. "Didn't know what?" he asked, his expression unreadable. "That I wasn't worth basic human decency? That I had to be wealthy for you to acknowledge me?" She flinched, every word pressing against her like a crushing weight. "No, Let's not pretend, Miss Hamilton," he interrupted, his tone cold now. "You judged me, dismissed me, because I didn't fit your definition of success. But tell me, how does it feel now, to stand here, in my home, knowing you were so very wrong?" Humiliation surged through her, but so did something else. Regret. Deep, aching regret. She had been raised in a world where wealth dictated respect, where people were judged by their status rather than their character. But standing before him now, she saw how shallow that mindset truly was. "I was wrong," she admitted, forcing the words out despite the lump in her throat. "And I'm sorry." He studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, to her surprise, he smirked. "Apologies are easy, Miss Hamilton. Change is harder." With that, he turned away, leaving her standing there, drowning in the consequences of her own arrogance. The day she realized how wrong she had been about him, everything changed. She had always looked down on him, thinking he was nothing more than a simple gardener, someone beneath her. She had brushed off his polite smile and his kind gestures, never once stopping to wonder what kind of person he truly was. But now, the truth was out, and the reality was impossible to ignore. He wasn't just a gardener. He was the owner of the entire estate, a man with wealth beyond anything she could comprehend. The truth left her stunned, ashamed of the way she had judged him. It was then that something shifted inside her. For the first time, she saw him differently, not just as the gardener, but as someone who held power, grace, and intelligence in ways she had never considered before. As she tried to process the truth, a wave of guilt flooded her, mingled with a strange feeling she hadn't expected. Attraction. It was subtle at first, the kind of attraction that gnaws at you when you're suddenly aware of how wrong you've been about someone. She couldn't deny that her feelings for him were changing, but she was torn. She had built her entire world on the notion that she deserved someone who was her equal, someone who fit into the life she had always known. But now, with him, she felt something different, something powerful, but unsettling. The feelings bubbled up inside her, making her question everything she had believed about love and relationships. She was drawn to him in a way she hadn't expected, a pull that felt both exciting and terrifying. There was an undeniable chemistry between them, but she couldn't help but wonder if it was real, or if it was just the guilt and surprise of discovering who he truly was. Her attraction to him only complicated things further. She wanted to get closer, to understand him, but her pride and past judgments kept holding her back. Every time she looked at him, she was reminded of how unfair she had been, how she had treated him as less than he was. She struggled to admit the depth of her feelings, fearing that by acknowledging them, she would be admitting her mistake. But despite her inner battle, every time he smiled at her or showed her kindness, the walls she had carefully built around herself began to crumble. She felt conflicted. On one hand, there was the attraction, the undeniable pull towards him, but on the other, there was the fear of what that attraction might mean. Would it mean she had to change everything about how she viewed herself and the world around her? Could she truly accept someone who had once been beneath her, in both status and respect? And could she ever forgive herself for how she had treated him? She didn't know the answers, but one thing was clear. The feelings she had for him were no longer something she could ignore. Each encounter with him made her question the rigid boundaries she had placed on love, wealth, and attraction. She had thought she knew exactly what she wanted. But now, everything felt uncertain. The more she fought her growing feelings for him, the more they seemed to intensify. It was as if she couldn't escape the connection between them, no matter how hard she tried. She knew she had to confront it, but the thought of opening herself up to someone she had once considered beneath her felt like a monumental task. Could she truly accept him, not just for his wealth, but for who he was as a person? Would she be able to let go of the prejudices that had defined her and embrace the possibility of something real, something beyond the surface? These questions lingered in her mind, leaving her with an emotional battle she couldn't ignore. As much as she wanted to push the feelings aside and pretend they didn't exist, the pull between them was undeniable. She was trapped in a battle between her pride, her guilt, and the growing attraction that threatened to take over everything. Could she ever come to terms with the fact that the man she had once dismissed was now the one she was drawn to? Would she be able to face the consequences of her actions and find a way to build something real with him? Or would the weight of her past judgments and the tension between them keep them apart forever? Only time would tell, but for now, she was caught during an emotional storm, unable to ignore the feelings that were brewing between them. Ava couldn't shake off the embarrassment burning inside her. Every encounter with Liam replayed in her mind like a cruel joke. The way she dismissed him, the superiority in her tone, and the sheer ignorance of assuming he was nothing more than a simple gardener made her stomach twist. She wanted to disappear, to rewind time and fix everything. But life never worked that way. The damage was done, and now she had to live with the consequences. Still, fate had a strange way of offering second chances, and she was about to find out how much she would have to prove herself. She had been avoiding Liam ever since she learned the truth. Every time she saw him in the mansion, her throat tightened, and she turned the other way. But she couldn't run forever. One evening, as she walked through the vast garden, hoping to clear her thoughts, she found him standing by the fountain, watching the water ripple under the moonlight. Her heart pounded. This was it. Her chance to make things right. She took a deep breath and stepped closer. Liam. Mr. Carter. He turned his gaze toward her, his expression unreadable. The cold indifference in his eyes stung, but she knew she deserved it. You finally learned my name, he said coolly, his voice devoid of the warmth she once ignored. Ava swallowed hard. The words tangled in her throat. I wanted to apologize. I was arrogant? Judgmental? He finished for her, his tone sharp but controlled. She flinched but nodded. Yes, and I'm truly sorry. I had no right to look down on you or assume anything about you. I was wrong. Liam studied her for a long moment, his gaze searching. Sorry doesn't change what happened, he finally said. No, it doesn't, she admitted, forcing herself to hold his stare. But I want to prove that I'm not the person you think I am. A bitter smile tugged at his lips. And how exactly do you plan to do that? She hesitated. She hadn't thought that far ahead. She had expected him to either accept or reject her apology, not challenge her to prove herself. Give me a chance, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Let me show you that I can be better. Liam tilted his head, considering. Then, to her surprise, he gave a slow nod. All right. You want a second chance? Prove to me that you're more than just a spoiled rich girl. Her stomach clenched. She had no idea what that meant, but she nodded anyway. I will. The next morning, Ava was given her first test. Liam handed her a pair of gardening gloves and pointed to a neglected part of the estate's garden. Fix this, he said simply. Make it beautiful again. She blinked. You want me to do actual gardening? His eyes glinted with amusement. Why? Too good to get your hands dirty? She gritted her teeth, shook her head, and got to work. The soil was hard, the weeds stubborn, and sweat dripped down her back as the sun bore down on her. Her manicured nails were ruined within the first hour, but she didn't stop. Every cut and scrape on her fingers felt like a lesson she needed to learn. Liam watched her from a distance, occasionally passing by to check her progress. He said nothing, but she could feel the weight of his gaze, assessing, judging. By sunset, she was exhausted. Dirt covered her clothes, and her muscles ached in places she didn't even know existed. But when she stepped back and looked at the transformed flower bed, she felt something she hadn't in a long time. Pride in something she had done with her own 2 hands. Liam walked over, nodding approvingly. Not bad. It wasn't much, but coming from him, it felt like a victory. But her test wasn't over. Over the next few days, Liam continued to challenge her. He made her interact with the estate's staff, learn their names, and understand their struggles. He had her sit in on meetings, making her see the responsibilities that came with wealth. And with each challenge, she grew. She listened, she learned, and for the first time in her life, she saw beyond her privileged world. One night, after a long day of work, she found herself in the kitchen, pouring a glass of water when Liam walked in. You didn't quit, he remarked, leaning against the counter. She exhaled a tired laugh. Thought about it, but I wanted to prove to you, and myself, that I could be better. He studied her for a long moment before finally saying, You have. Her chest tightened at his words. She had spent so much time trying to prove herself to him, but in reality, she had changed for herself. And that was the most valuable lesson of all. The media frenzy hit like a storm, and everything changed overnight. One moment, she was walking through the local market as if nothing had happened, and the next, her face was plastered across every gossip magazine, news site, and social media feed. The headline was everywhere. She mistreated the mansion owner, thinking he was a gardener. The story spread like wildfire, dragging every hidden detail of their interactions into public light. There was footage of her harsh words, her dismissive expressions, and clips of her once boasting to her friends about how she put the gardener in his place. The internet was ruthless, and so were the people who once admired her for her beauty and confidence. Now they turned into critics, mocking her shallowness and judging her every move. She couldn't go outside without hearing whispers behind her back, seeing phones pointed her way, or feeling the burning eyes of judgment. Meanwhile, he remained composed, poised, untouched by the storm. Reporters begged for interviews, tabloids offered huge amounts to get his side of the story, but he refused to say a word. His silence only fueled the chaos. The world built their narratives. Some romanticized the idea of a disguised billionaire testing the character of people around him, while others accused him of orchestrating the entire thing for attention. But she knew the truth. He had never wanted fame, never sought revenge. He had given her chances to redeem herself, to see past appearances, to value kindness over class. And now, as the scandal exploded around them, she finally saw the weight of what she had done. Her phone buzzed with messages from people who once admired her. Now, they called her fake, superficial, even cruel. Brands she once worked with distanced themselves quietly. Invitations to elite events stopped coming. Her world, once shiny and perfect, crumbled before her eyes. Alone in her apartment, lights off, curtains drawn, she sat scrolling through comment sections, tears running down her face. It wasn't just the public hate that hurt. It was that he had stayed silent through it all. No defense, no confrontation, no retaliation. He didn't need to say a word because the truth was louder than anything he could have uttered. She wanted to call him, to explain, to tell him how sorry she was, how blind she had been, how much she wished she had seen the real him from the start. But what would she even say? That she was wrong? That she had judged someone without knowing the depths of his soul? That her pride had cost her something far more valuable than image? His trust? As the public opinion worsened, even her close friends began to distance themselves. She wasn't just a headline anymore. She was a symbol of everything wrong with how society judges worth. The weight of it all pressed down on her chest like a stone. Yet somewhere deep inside, she knew this was more than a punishment. It was a mirror, showing her who she truly was. And while the world watched, mocked, and judged, she knew the only person she needed to face now was herself. But even amidst all this shame, a tiny flame of hope still burned. Hope that one day, maybe not now, maybe not soon, but someday, he might look at her not as the girl who mistook him for a gardener, but as the woman who learned from her mistakes and grew. But would the world even allow that redemption? Or had she fallen too far? The days blurred together as the scandal refused to die down. A trending hashtag, meme videos, and late-night comedy skits all fueled the embarrassment. Then came the interviews with mansion staff. They shared stories of how kind he always was to everyone, never using his wealth as power. How he'd smile even when others dismissed him. Their words made him shine even brighter, and her cruelty seemed even colder. The imbalance of it all was unbearable. Yet the man himself? He remained a mystery, unseen, unheard, private. Until one evening, a press release appeared on his company's official site. No interviews, no drama, just a statement. We are all more than what we appear to be. Sometimes we are given the chance to witness someone's true heart, not through words, but through actions. I hope the world remembers that kindness costs nothing, and judgment costs everything. No names were mentioned, but everyone knew it was about her. The words weren't bitter, they were dignified, painful, but full of grace. It was the final blow to her pride, and the first stitch in the wound that might eventually heal. That night, she walked to the mansion gates, press cameras trailing behind her, flashlights blinding, questions flying. She didn't speak. She only left a single handwritten letter at the gate and walked away, head down, heart heavy. Now the world would wait and watch. Would this become a redemption story or remain a cautionary tale? She stood at the edge of the garden, watching him from afar as he trimmed the roses with a strange calmness that didn't match the storm brewing inside her. Everything had changed since the day she discovered who he was. The man she'd mocked, belittled, and labeled as just a gardener was the billionaire owner of the estate. Every interaction they had, every cold glance and snide remark she'd thrown at him, now echoed back to her with a sting of shame. She wanted to speak, to apologize, but the words remained lodged in her throat. He turned around, catching her gaze for just a second before walking away, his face unreadable. She followed him into the mansion, the very place she thought he was unworthy to belong to, and tried to catch up. "Wait!" she called out, her voice trembling. He paused in the hallway, his back still turned. "Why are you here?" he asked flatly, without emotion. "To talk," she whispered. "There's nothing left to talk about," he said, finally facing her. His eyes weren't cold. They were tired, disappointed. That was worse. She took a step closer, but he backed away. "You judged me because of how I looked, because you thought I didn't belong. Now that you know the truth, I suddenly matter?" The words sliced through her like knives. "No, that's not it. I was wrong. I was blind. I see it now," she pleaded. He scoffed. "Now you see?" Convenient timing. She reached for his hand, but he pulled away. "Please, just listen," she begged, tears stinging her eyes. "You don't get to cry," he said. "You don't get to act like the victim when you were the one swinging the axe." She recoiled as if slapped. "I didn't know who you were." "Exactly," he snapped. "You treated me like dirt because you thought I had nothing. So tell me, if I were still the gardener, would you be standing here right now?" She hesitated, her silence answering the question louder than words. He nodded slowly. "That's what I thought." He moved past her, but she blocked the doorway. "I made a mistake, okay? A huge one. But don't throw away what we had. Even if it started wrong, maybe it can still mean something." He looked at her with pain in his eyes. "You didn't see me. You saw someone you thought wasn't worth your time. That's not love. That's entitlement." She swallowed her pride, desperation breaking through. "I want to try. I want to make things right." He shook his head. "You want redemption for your guilt. I wanted someone who saw me before the truth came out." She reached into her bag and pulled out the small pressed flower he once gave her, a symbol of the only moment she'd truly looked at him with softness. "I kept this," she whispered. "I don't know why. But I did." He stared at it for a moment, a flicker of something in his eyes, then turned away again. "Some things break too far to fix." She watched him walk out, her heart shattering with every step he took. The door closed behind him with a soft click, but it echoed like thunder in her ears. She was alone, surrounded by opulence, yet completely hollow. She had chased wealth, appearances, and titles, and in doing so, lost the only thing that ever truly mattered. And for the first time, she understood. All the money in the world couldn't buy back trust or erase the pain she caused. All she could do now was wait and hope that one day he'd be willing to see the real change in her before it was too late. She couldn't believe what she was about to do. The same man she once mocked, dismissed, and humiliated was now the one her heart refused to let go of. She'd spent days watching him from a distance, how he moved through the mansion he owned, not as a servant, but as someone who had built his empire with silence, grace, and mystery. The moment the truth had exploded into her world, it shattered her pride into pieces. But now it wasn't just guilt driving her. It was love. Real, raw, inconvenient love that had crept in through the cracks of her arrogance. And now, with every second she hesitated, she felt like she was losing him. He was colder than ever, distant, guarded. And why wouldn't he be? After all, she had misjudged him for everything he wasn't and only saw his worth when the world confirmed it with gold, titles, and power. She wasn't sure what she had to offer now, but still, she couldn't walk away. She stormed into the garden where he was quietly pruning a tree, like old times. "Why are you still doing this?" she blurted, the frustration in her voice barely hiding the desperation. He didn't even look at her. "Because this is what I love. Not the suits, not the gala events. Just this." She stepped closer. "I love you." Silence. Cold. Brutal silence. He clipped another branch. "You don't love me. You love what I turned out to be." That cut her deeper than any insult she'd ever heard. She grabbed his hand. "I was wrong, completely wrong, but I see you now. And I know it's too late, but—" "It is," he interrupted sharply. But then his voice cracked just slightly. Because you had the chance to see me when I was invisible to the world. And you chose to be cruel. She didn't deny it. I know. And I'll regret that forever. But I'm not walking away. I'm not pretending like I deserve you. I just want to fight for you, even if I lose. That made him stop. His eyes met hers for the first time in days. Fight for me? How? She stepped closer, her voice shaking. By being better. By staying. By proving that I'm not the same woman who judged you by dirt on your hands. By learning to stand in the mud with you, instead of waiting at the top. Her words hung in the air like a challenge to herself, and for the first time, he saw something in her eyes that felt different. Not pity, not guilt, just honest vulnerability. But he didn't make it easy. And what happens when someone richer, cleaner, more polished comes along? I'll still be here, she said without blinking. Because now I know it's not the suit, or the car, or the mansion. It's the man who planted his own garden, built his own empire, and never needed to prove anything to anyone. The wind blew gently, and for a moment, it was as if the garden itself was listening. I was cruel, she whispered. But I don't want your money, your house, or your name. I just want a chance to make things right. He looked at her hand, still holding his. And what if I'm not ready to forgive you? Her voice dropped. Then I'll wait. And while I wait, I'll become someone worthy of your forgiveness. There it was, the twist neither of them had seen coming. She, who once wouldn't speak to a man without a six-figure wardrobe, now stood with dirty shoes and tear-filled eyes, pleading not for luxury, but for love. And he, the man who had been dismissed by the world, now held the power to decide whether he wanted to open his heart again, or keep it locked forever. She didn't expect him to say anything, and he didn't. Not that day. But the next morning, she found a single note left in the garden. It read, "If you want to fight, show me who you are when no one's watching." She smiled through her tears, because the real war had just begun, not to win his wealth, but to earn his trust. And this time, she wasn't going to run. She stood frozen on the grand balcony of the estate she once mocked, watching as the man she'd dismissed as a gardener now stood before the press, confidently revealing his identity as the sole heir of the entire property she once treated like her playground. The media cameras flashed wildly, the world watching as he prepared to make the boldest move of his life, a move that would rewrite everything. She never imagined this day would come, not after all the harsh words she threw his way, not after how she treated him like a nobody. The guilt gnawed at her from the inside, but it was the look in his eyes that truly broke her, a look that held both love and restraint. He hadn't forgotten the humiliation, but he hadn't let it harden his heart either. That night, she remembered the way he used to water the roses carefully, how he smiled when kids passed by, how his eyes lit up when she asked careless questions about his life. It all made sense now. His silence, his poise, his strange confidence. He wasn't just a gardener, he was the man who had tested her heart without her knowing. And she failed. But love doesn't follow rules. It doesn't hold grudges if it's real. That's why what happened next stunned everyone. The billionaire prince of the estate, standing before flashing cameras and a stunned public, looked directly at her. "I bought this house back, not just because it was my family's legacy," he said, voice steady, "but because I left a piece of myself here, with someone who didn't see me then, but maybe she sees me now." The crowd gasped. She stepped back, heart pounding, cheeks burning. Was he giving her a second chance in front of the world? This couldn't be happening. But it was. He held out his hand, not as a master to a servant, not as a billionaire to a nobody, but as a man to a woman who once broke his heart, but unknowingly owned it too. She looked into his eyes and saw everything she missed before. The kindness, the strength, the quiet power. Her tears spilled before she could hold them back. "I was wrong about you," she whispered, barely able to speak, "and I don't deserve your forgiveness." But he stepped closer, brushing her tears gently. "Maybe," he said softly. "But love isn't about deserving. It's about choosing." And just like that, the class differences, the judgments, the pride, it all vanished between them. In its place stood a love story the city would never forget. The story of a woman who judged a man by his shoes, and the man who wore humility better than a crown. As fireworks lit up the sky behind the mansion, people didn't just see a wealthy heir and a humbled woman. They saw two souls reunited by something far rarer than riches: genuine, tested, unconditional love. And when they kissed under the starlit sky, it wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was a beginning written in truth, forgiveness, and the kind of love that defies every boundary. Because sometimes, the grandest gesture of all is simply showing up with your heart open, even after it's been broken. Imagine standing in her shoes, pride shattered, regret burning, facing the man she once mocked. The same hands she dismissed as dirty now hold the keys to a world she once thought she owned. The air is thick with tension, the weight of every cruel word she hurled at him hanging between them like a blade. Could you swallow your arrogance and apologize? Or would pride choke the words before they leave your throat? This isn't just her story. It's a mirror held up to every snap judgment you've ever made. About the co-worker you labeled unambitious, the stranger you deemed unimportant, the loved one you underestimated. What if you were the one who got it all wrong? Let's rewind. Picture him again. The quiet gardener kneeling in the soil, sweat glistening on his brow, tending to roses with the care of someone who knows growth takes time. She stormed past him, blind to the quiet power in his calm replies, the flicker of amusement in his eyes when she called him just a worker. But you, the reader, saw it, didn't you? The subtle hints, the way staff whispered his name with reverence, the leather-bound book he hid, the tailored suits that replaced his dirt-stained uniform. You knew he was more. She didn't. Now ask yourself, would you? We live in a world obsessed with labels. The gardener, the billionaire, the maid, the heir. We dress people in stereotypes before we learn their stories. But what if the gardener holds the deed to the mansion? What if the maid dreams of owning it? Mansion Secrets isn't just a hashtag, it's a challenge. Tag it and tell us. When did you misjudge someone? Was it the barista you ignored who later became your boss? The quiet classmate who now runs a Fortune 500 company? Share your story. Let's dissect the cost of assumptions. He could have crushed her, exposed her arrogance to the world. Instead, he chose silence. No interviews, no revenge. Just a single statement. Kindness costs nothing. Judgment costs everything. His dignity turned her into the villain of her own story. But here's the twist. He still loves her. You felt it, didn't you? The way his gaze lingered when she apologized. The note he left in the garden. Show me who you are when no one's watching. Love doesn't vanish. It waits. It tests. Now, flip the script. You're him. The person who hurt you crawls back, desperate for forgiveness. Their apology is raw, their tears real. But trust is shattered. Do you let them rebuild it? Or do you walk away, protecting the pieces of your heart they broke? This isn't hypothetical. We've all been here. The friend who betrayed you. The partner who took you for granted. The parent who never saw your worth. What did you choose? Forgiveness? Or pride? Tag number sign. Mansion Secrets and drop your answer. Let's clash perspectives. Class differences, status, wealth. Society hands us a script. Know your place. But love laughs at scripts. It blooms in the cracks between gardener and heir, defying every rule. Yet how many of us dare to rewrite the narrative? Think of the last time you hid your true self to fit in. You took the job for prestige, not passion. The relationship you ended because others wouldn't approve. Now imagine her, stripped of her designer clothes, kneeling in the dirt, fighting for a love that demands she become better. Not richer, not fancier. Better. Could you do it? Could you trade pride for growth? Or would you cling to the safety of your ego? The question isn't just about forgiveness. It's about transformation. Subscribe to The Wealthy Heart for daily deep dives into stories that challenge societal norms. Watch our video, From Arrogance to Redemption, Can Love Rewrite Class? And join live debates where viewers clash over, would you give a second chance? Hit the bell icon. Don't miss the next chapter of Mansion Secrets. This isn't a fairy tale. It's a choice. Every day we decide, judge or understand, hold grudges or heal, walk away or fight. So let's hear it. Would you forgive her? Everyone deserves redemption. Her guilt proves she's human. Love is stronger than pride. Trust is fragile. Once broken, it can't be glued back with tears. He deserves peace, not drama. Where do you stand? The polls are open on our channel. Vote now and see real-time results from viewers worldwide. The most passionate comments get featured in next week's video. Turn your words into part of the story. Before you go, try this. For one day, wear the lens of the gardener. See the world without labels. Notice the security guard who writes poetry. The CEO, who volunteers at animal shelters. The single parent is working 3 jobs. Then ask, what's their secret? Document your observations and tag #sign Mansion Secrets. The most eye-opening entries win a shout-out in our next episode. The garden gates are open, but the path isn't easy. It's thorny, messy, and raw. But it's where growth happens. Subscribe to The Wealthy Heart for daily stories that twist tropes, challenge biases, and make you question, what would I do? Tap below. Join a community of 500,000 readers fighting to see beyond surfaces. And let's rewrite endings, together.